So good morning, welcome to everybody. Again, thank you for being here and for being connected.
Hello, I think that we can start. Dom, can you hear us?
Yes, hi everyone. Okay, so let me start by saying, well, my name is Dom Holdaway. I am Associate Professor at the Università of Urbino. I would start by saying I'm very sorry not to be with you, but I'm stuck here in Urbino because of the weather situation that I'm sure you're all aware of. But very happy to be being able to follow the proceedings of this conference, and I've been really enjoying everyone's work. So thank you, and thank you especially to Marta and to Stefania for your great organization. It's my pleasure to chair this fourth panel of the Media Mutations Conference, a panel that, as you can see from the program, is full of, well, we have four really fascinating papers that, as you can see again from the titles, I think the papers will raise a lot of really rich questions about the methodologies in particular that we can use to study this object, which is the medical drama. And in that sense, I think as Professor Irene Cambrabadi's keynote this morning, a really rich and fascinating keynote, has functioned as a nice kind of bridge to this panel. So we have four papers. I would remind all of the authors that you have 20 minutes for your papers, and I'll obviously remind you of that time if there's any need to do so. I would say if you agree to leave the discussion to the end, so that we can maybe combine questions that connect all of the papers and raise at least some interesting points. And with no further ado, I would hand over to the first speakers. So the first paper is by Paolo della Torre, Maurizio Naldi, and Paolo Fantozzi, all of whom work at the University LUMSA in Rome. Paolo della Torre is Associate Professor of Film History and Film Criticism, and her research is focused on film and television from a really rich variety of perspectives, from ethical, philosophical issues relating to both contemporary and past products, to study the film exhibition. Actually, we've overlapped on a couple of projects recently, in particular in relation to film exhibition and cinema management, all the way through to the application of qualitative and quantitative methods to understand TV storytelling, which connects to the paper today. Maurizio Naldi is full professor of information systems also at LUMSA and course director on the degree of informational technologies for data management. His research focuses on digital models, network economics, and electronic commerce, and he has very many articles in these areas, most recently including a lot of work on privacy and data and online public discourse, as well as sentiment analysis methodologies. And Paolo Fantozzi is assistant professor at LUMSA, where he also works on the area of digital studies related to AI and intelligent systems and cognitive analytics. The title of their paper today is Analyzing the Inner Structure of Episodes in the House MD through Network Analysis. And so over to you.
Thank you very much. Good morning. Thank you very much for your presentation, and thank you very much at the organizer for having us and for the beautiful today conference. And today we are discussing before. Okay, perfect. No problem. We are discussing a research project that Maurizio, Paolo Fantozzi, and I are working on together. And the research focus on the television series House Medical Division. As we know, the series was created by David Shore, acclaimed by critics and enjoyed great popularity. But before delving into our analysis and hypothesis, let's start by examining how other scholars have approached the analysis of this medical drama. As Marta Rocchi wrote, medical drama series have been approached using various methodologies, including stories on genre and textuality, considering them as both linguistic products and part of media studies, Other approaches includes analysis of melodramatic connotation, detailed examination of moral, religion, and racial issues, gender studies, anthropological studies, and innovative research involving qualitative models, social network analysis, and artificial intelligence. Therefore, there has been a multidisciplinary approach that demonstrates the interest in medical dramas as objects of study, not only in terms of production and consumption practice, but also in the analysis of television narrative text. House medical division has also been studied from different perspectives with various methodologies. Here are some of them. For instance, the medical perspective, whether Dr. House is realistic or not, and whether the show can be helpful in medical education. Ethical perspective, especially regarding bioethical issues, and whether the behaviors of House and his team can be considered ethically and morally justified. Philosophical perspective, what kind of thinker is House, what philosophy does he draw inspiration from, and more linguistic approach. Many studies have analyzed, for instance, the language of non-correctness used by Dr. House, politeness or impoliteness, and media studies. For instance, about the hybridization of genre in House, where procedural and medical elements are combined, and the unique characteristic of House as a medical detective inspired by Sherlock Holmes, presenting a doctor as an investigator where disease are the crimes that need to be diagnosed. And the figure of Dr. House as a typical anti-hero of contemporary quality television, and the definition of his reasoning and diagnostic formulation. But another important approach is the ecosystem approach, Pescatore, Innocente, Brambilla study, which seeks to define a typology of structure to describe the narrative ecosystem of contemporary television series. Dr. House is considered an example of the taxonomy known as stabilizing selection, where diversity decreases and the population tends to stabilize on a particular trait value. Another worthy study is the semiotic analysis of Bernardelli, which characterizes House as a Popperian physician. The process House employs in seeking the correct diagnosis for a patient's illness is structured around conflict. House constantly seeks conflicting opinions within his medical team because he believes that hypotheses and errors lead to the right diagnosis. Discovering the correct diagnosis and the reasoning process to achieve it are the central elements of each episode. The focus is more on uncovering the disease itself, and once the puzzle is solved, the treatment of disease plays a minimal role. This unique narrative structure set House apart as a medical drama. Building upon these studies, our research aim to concentrate on narrative structure of the House series with a particular focus, because we have analyzed all the dialogues from 8 seasons of House, transcribing them from the subtitle. And we wonder at this point if it's possible to define one or more recurring structure in dialogues that occur between the characters in House, and thus to define a taxonomy of dialogic narrative, because the dialogues in television are central, but for us it's important not the significance of dialogue, but the structure of dialogue and the structure of the characters in the dialogue, inside the dialogue. Not surprisingly, many linguistics have recently focused on the dialogues of television series. We refer mainly to Monica Bednarek, who introduced the concept of expressive character identity for relevant character traits. A wide range of linguistic features can contribute to this type of characterization, including conversational structure, affective language, lexical richness, terms of address, and so on. And this type of approach does interest us because, as we said, we are following only the structure, the main structure of dialogue, and not the significance of the single nouns, verbs, etc. But she defines speech by one speaker, monologues, asides, voiceover, narration, between two speakers, dyadic interaction, and between several speakers, multi-party interaction. Our perspective involves constructing a graph for each scene, and each node in the graph represents a character. The arrows between the characters represent the dialogues, and the direction of the arrow indicates the direction of the dialogue. For instance, in this case, you can see House speak with Caddy, Caddy speak with Wilson, and House speak with Wilson, and Wilson only listens to both. But at this point, I can ask an help to Maurizio to explain better the methodology and the graph.
Thanks, Paola. Okay, so as Paola said, our interest is in uncovering the structured dialogues, and you use graphs, and our aim is not to identify the roles of single characters, rather the structure. So in our approach, for example, Dr. House talking to somebody else is exactly equivalent to somebody else talking to Dr. House. So what we care is just the number of characters involved and direction of talk. So, for example, these two structures where you see on the one on the left, Dr. House is talking to Dr. Caddy and Dr. Wilson. And Dr. Caddy is talking to Dr. Wilson, and that's all. So Dr. Wilson is just listening, not talking to anybody. And for us, this structure is exactly identical to the one on the right, where it is instead Dr. Caddy who's talking to the other two characters. Dr. Wilson is talking to a third character, and the third character is talking to nobody. Okay, so what is important is just the structure. So here we have three nodes, one node with a degree of 2, so it's talking to two characters, and one of those, the remaining two characters is talking to the third character, and the third character is talking to nobody, okay? So it's just the role of nodes, not the roles of characters. And this is what is called, recognizing the identity of structures, despite the different assignments of characters to nodes, is what is called the graph isomorphism problem in computer science. And so, for example, these two graphs you see here may appear different, okay? But if you just rearrange nodes, and you see that, for example, if you move in the one on the right, you move node E3 to the left and E4 to the right, you find exactly the same structure depicted on the left. So to us, those two graphs are exactly identical. And this is a problem known to be, as the nerds say, an NP-complete problem. So it cannot be solved in polynomial time. What does that mean? It means that as the size of the graph grows, so imagine you have graph, say, of 10,000 nodes and so on, the time to understand and to recognize identical structure goes not linearly, but goes more than linearly. So let's say if you double the size of the graph, the time needed to solve the problem grows more than twice, much more than twice in some cases. This is not a problem here because we have very small graphs. So let's say graphs of 7, 8 characters at once. And what we did in House IMD was to observe all the scenes in the episodes. And we didn't yet. So what you see here is just what we got in roughly 70–80% of the episodes, and we observed actually 700 different structures. Okay, but they can be somewhat grouped, and we can group according to 2 criteria. So, for example, using the number of characters involved, so distinguish between scenes in which there are 2 people talking, 3 people talking, 4 or so on, or group then by the connectivity pattern. So who's talking to whom? Okay, and see what we got here. And we have, if we look at the number of characters involved, we have roughly a bit more than 30% of the scenes involve just 2 characters, so what we call dyads. And then we have 18% involving 3 characters, triads, and 14% involving 4 characters. And so you see that the more characters are involved, the smaller the percentage. So there are fewer scenes involving those characters. And there are quite a large fraction of scenes, 21.7%, where there's just one character, so either talking by himself or not talking at all, and or, for example, scenes with 2–3 people not talking at all. Okay, so just scenes where the characters are somewhat are present there but do nothing else. They may act, do something, but they don't talk. And so you see here examples of scenes with 2 characters, 3 characters, and with 4 characters. And I don't know if shall I go on or you? Okay, if you prefer. Okay. Okay. So this is the something more about the scenes with 2 characters, and which is the dominant structure. So we have in more than 30% of the scenes, and it was a structure somewhat established and classified in the Greek drama, and they called it stikomitia or psychomitia, depending on whether you prefer the Greek or the Latin pronunciation. And you see that we in this case we have typically 2 characters talking to each other, so sort of ping pong or back and forth dialogues between 2. And this is it's not my field, but I guess it can used to represent a strong dramatic intensity or
yes,
confrontation between the 2 speakers.
I don't know, because I think we have to running, so only to I want to say something about stikomitia. Yes, it's a Greek. It has been coded in the Greek drama, and it involves a strong interaction between characters and highlights the relationship, and it creates a strong dramatic intensity. But I want to say something about this structure, the tetrads. We have 4 or more character together that talks, but it is very important the character, the apex character, the hub. Yes, we call it the hub structure, because we have a character that is
character that's talking to all of the others, but you see the others do not. Okay. Okay. And so the abstract, the star structure is something that is recurring here. So we have a character that is dominant and talks to all the others, but the others do not talk between each other. So for example, I was talking to character B, C, and D, but characters B, C, and D do not talk to each other. So this is the, aside from the monologue and sticomythia, the star structure is the dominant one. Okay, please. Go to the conclusions.
In our conclusion, we can say that the structure, the dialogue structure of Dr. House, it's similar to the structure of the Greek tragedy, like Aristotle said in Poetica, or Platone in dialogues about Socrates, etc., etc. But I think that this structure is very similar to the way of thinking of House, and to the way of House use his rationality to understand and resolve the diagnosis. So most of the episodes are with House that talk with his team, and he asks his team, and from the team he receives the idea to identify the right diagnosis for the patient. So this structure, I think, is the way to visualize the rational procession of thinking of House for his diagnosis. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that. That was really, really fascinating. I already have loads of questions that I would like to ask you. And thank you also for keeping in time. Actually, you were rushing at the end, but you actually finished in 19 minutes, so you did great. Let me pass straight over to the second paper then. Our second paper today is by Alice Fedotova, who's presenting the paper and who I believe is online as well. But the paper is also written by Alberto Barron Cedegno, both of whom work at the University of Bologna. So Alice Fedotova is a master's student in translation and technology at University with you guys in Bologna. Having obtained a bachelor's in intercultural and linguistic mediation with a thesis on subtitling, she's currently working on machine learning approaches for the analysis of medical dramas. Whereas Professor Barron Cedegno is associate professor whose research focuses on the intersection of various disciplines, including natural language processing, information retrieval, and machine learning. And in particular, he's been working on the cross-language assessment of text, looking at different aspects such as originality and intent. So the paper that, as I said, Alice will be presenting this morning is entitled Toward the Automatic Identification of Isotopies Based on Dialogue. Alice, over to you.
Good morning. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, I will be sharing the screen. Okay. Can you see it?
Yes, I can.
Okay. All right. Oops. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for the introduction. First of all, I would like to thank the organizers for this very interesting conference and for giving me the opportunity to present here at Media Mutations. Today, I will be talking about the work that I've been conducting with Professor Alberto Barron on the topic of automatic isotopy identification in the context of medical dramas. I will start by explaining what I mean by isotopy identification. Then I will move on to present a short recap of what isotopies are in the context of medical dramas. Next, I will be presenting the research the research questions at the core of this work and what we have been doing to address them. Lastly, I will be presenting the results that we obtained and a few ideas for future research on this topic. Before moving on, just a small spoiler alert. as I will be showing some examples from Grey's Anatomy. So if you are currently catching up, don't worry, I will warn you before showing anything. So we are going to start with an example. This is just a short scene from the 8th season of Grey's Anatomy. I hope that you can hear the audio.
How was your lunch, Dr. Gray?
Oh, it was fine. Actually, no line at all. I was able to get my sandwich, find my daughter, see my husband, go watch the groundbreaking surgery that's going on right next door, and still get back in time to do my work.
Sounds like you have it all, Dr. Gray.
I do, actually.
Did you hear the audio, just to double check?
Online, I certainly could. I'm not sure if everybody in the...
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Alicia, just to say quickly, I'm not sure if you want to switch on your camera, please do.
Oh,
But obviously
unfortunately,
you
due
don't
to
have
the weather conditions, I'm a bit afraid because my Wi-Fi has been a bit
No
unstable.
problem.
So
Totally understandable.
just
No
to be
worries.
safe. All right. So what I mean by isotopy identification is to use artificial intelligence to automatically assign portions of an episode, just like the one from before, to 3 possible isotopies: the professional plot, the sentimental plot, and the medical case. More specifically, we do this by teaching a deep learning model to do this by looking at frames and subtitles. The idea is that the model learns to identify the isotopies by noticing some textual and visual patterns that tend to be characteristic of a certain isotopy. This is, of course, a very challenging task, even for humans, which is why the core of this research is essentially how far can we go? So as for the isotopies, so these are the classes that the model learns to identify. So class in the context of deep learning is the term that is typically used in the context of this task. You are surely already familiar with them from the work of Professors Rocchi and Pescatore and the other presentations here at Media Mutations. But as a short recap, the professional plot deals with the relationships and dynamics within the hospital among doctors and other medical staff. The sentimental plot deals with the emotional and personal relationships between the main characters throughout the series, and it covers a wide sphere of emotions such as friendship, love, empathy, and conflict. Lastly, the medical cases plot is related to patients and diseases that normally change within each episode. So the research questions are the following. Research question number 1 is, which modality is more informative for the task of predicting the isotopies, the visual one or the textual one? Research question number 2 is, does using both frames and subtitles result in a more accurate model? To answer these research questions, we first prepare a multimodal dataset by extracting subtitles and frames based on the medical dramas dataset developed by the Department of Arts. Then we use this dataset to implement and evaluate models that take in this information and learn to identify the isotopies. Then we test these models to assess how well they perform. And based on the performance metrics that we obtain, we then proceed to answer the previously mentioned research questions. So as for the data, we mainly experimented with Grey's Anatomy. So we used all of the coded Grey's Anatomy dataset to construct our corpus by adding the information from the subtitles and the keyframes. The final dataset contains about 17,000 instances. The most represented class is, of course, the sentimental plot, while the least represented one is the professional plot. As for the models, we experimented with 3 main settings. Unimodal visual setting, where the model learns to identify the isotopies based on the subtitles. No, I mean, based on the frames. A unimodal textual model that looks at the subtitles. And lastly, a multimodal model that leverages both modalities. So the visual model is called the clip. And for each segment in the episode, the clip model just looks at one frame. So for example, in the context of the example from before, the model sees only the frame where the doctor looks at Meredith. Then we have BERT, which is a very known model in natural language processing. And BERT looks at all of the subtitles in the segment, so the whole dialogue. And it learns to identify the isotopies based on these subtitles, all of the subtitles of the segment. And then we have MMBT, which is the multimodal model, which looks at all of the information that we have extracted. So by segment, I mean something which more or less corresponds to the example that we have seen before. So to evaluate the performance of the models, we are going to use a metric called F1 score. So bear with me, because this is probably the most technical part of this whole presentation. So F1 score is based on two other metrics, precision and recall. So to understand precision, you can ask yourself, of all the instances identified as, for example, sentimental plots, how many were actually sentimental plots? Precision is sort of like when a model predicts a class, is it usually right? Recall is slightly different, because it is about, like, of all the sentimental plots, how many did the model correctly identify as sentimental plots? I mean, they sound similar, but they are slightly different. Precision is about getting the answers right. Recall is more about finding all relevant instances. And there is sort of a trade-off between these two. A model might identify more instances, but also be less precise. Or on the other hand, be more, let's say, conservative and identify fewer instances. The F1 score summarizes both of these measures. If one of them is very low, this is reflected in the F1 score as well. But let's say for the purpose of this presentation, the main point is that the higher the F1 score, the better. And also it is a value between 0 and 1. So now that we have clarified how the evaluation is performed, we can move on to answer the first research question. So which modality is more informative, the visual or the textual? So it appears that the text is more informative overall. As you can see, the highest F1 score, around 0.69, is achieved by the textual model. One of the reasons could be that the model had essentially all of the subtitles available, but not all of the frames. However, to put this result into perspective, it is also helpful to look at the individual F1 scores of each class. So besides having a single overall F1 score, we can look at the performance of the model on each of the three classes. And by doing so, we notice something interesting. That is, it appears that the professional plot class benefits from the text more than the other classes. As you can see, it obtains an F1 score of only 0.28 in the case of the visual model, and a much higher F1 score of 0.57 in the case of the textual model. So the difference between the models is equal to 0.29, which is quite noticeable compared to the improvement on the other classes. One reason could be that visually, both the professional plot and the medical case share the hospital setting, but another reason could be the unique textual characteristics of the professional plot class. Here is a word cloud with some keywords extracted from a corpus of professional plot dialogues. As you can see, there are mainly three categories of words. So words related to the profession, for example, the roles, resident, attending, or like elements of the job, like the pager. Then we have sort of medical jargon, but above all, we also have quite a lot of course words, which makes sense considering that the depiction of the professional lives of the characters can be quite emotionally charged sometimes. So yeah, moving on to research question number 2. So the research question number 2 was, does the inclusion of keyframes result in higher performance as compared to only using the subtitles? And as you can see, the inclusion of keyframes results in higher performance. So the textual model obtains an F1 score of 0.69, and the multimodal MMBT model obtains a slightly higher F1 score of 0.71. This can be considered a promising result given that the frames were extracted somewhat arbitrarily and we only considered 1 frame per segment. So as you can see from this graph, the multimodal model, of course, gets more instances right. More specifically, there are 1,277 instances that only the multimodal model got right, slightly more than 11,000 instances that both got right, which is very good, but also 965 instances that only the textual model got right. So the question is, what tends to cause the models to make mistakes? And spoiler alert, I'm going to show an example of what I believe is the main reason why the models get confused, which is cases where there is sort of conflicting visual and textual information. So I'm going to show you an example to give you some context, definitely more context than what is available to the models, but which is important to understand why the models didn't get this segment right.
Can I request that ORs be stocked with more than 1 flashlight in the future? Get this baby out of me safely and you can have whatever you want.
What about Wham?
I like Sebastian.
Sebastian Shepherd? It's a bit of a mouthful. Brooks?
I'm not giving birth to a country singer.
No, I see Heather. Brooks.
Dude, you're operating in the dark? On your wife?
So this segment is particularly interesting because only the textual model got it right. The multimodal one got it wrong. I mean, it is fairly clear that this is a sentimental scene, and it isn't unlikely that the textual model might notice a word like wife, which can, of course, strongly indicate a sentimental plot. But the multimodal model classified this instance as a medical case. It could be that seeing the frame caused a bit of confusion because, as you can see, this might look more like a medical case from the visual channel alone. So for future work, in the light of this presentation, I believe there are a few avenues for future research. The first one would be to replace the textual model. So far, we considered subtitles in English, but there are also multilingual models, which could be interesting to try out. For example, multilingual BERT, which is the multilingual counterpart of the BERT model that we used. It could be interesting to see if the performance of the model changes when it is trained on, for instance, Italian subtitles. Also, this would allow an exploration into how these models generalize in multilingual scenarios. Another possibility would be to train a model on other medical dramas as well, apart from Grey's Anatomy. One idea would be to use all of the available coded medical dramas. Another one could be to train a model on one specific medical drama and test whether it generalizes to other dramas as well. So we know from prior research that some medical dramas are closer to each other in terms of narratives. So maybe a model trained on something like Code Black might generalize better to Miami Medical rather than Grey's Anatomy. And lastly, of course, we could consider more frames. Of course, considering all of them would be significantly difficult from the point of view of training time, but considering slightly more than one would definitely provide more context. And in the light of these results, I would say that it is likely to improve the performance of the model even further. So that's all for me, and thank you for your attention.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Alicia. That was really, really fascinating. Really, really cool research and really fascinating. I can't wait to read more and hear more about it. Okay, so at this stage, I would say we're doing great in terms of time. We can hand over straight to the third speaker today, who is Greta Iapalucci. Greta is a research fellow at the Department of Arts at the University of Bologna, where she is also working on the NEAD framework PRIN project, which we've had about a couple of times already during the project that this conference is connected to. Greta holds a BA in Modern Languages and Literatures and an MA in Applied Linguistics, and her research interests include, among others, natural language processing, corpus linguistics, gender and language, social discourses, and audiovisual serial products. So again, a lot of really interesting intersections between the approaches that are emerging in this panel. And the title of Greta's paper today is Adopting NLP Techniques to Analyze Twitter Social Discourses Around the Good Doctor. So another case study still. Over to you, Greta.
Thank you, Dom, for this introduction. Thank you, everyone, for being here, and thank you to the organizers for having me. So, as Dom has just said, can you hear me okay? Okay. No? Should I get closer to the microphone? Okay. As Dom has just said, the title of my presentation is Adopting NLP Techniques to Analyze Twitter Social Discourses Around the Good Doctor. And before diving into the research, as Dom has already said, my research is part of a broader project, a research project of national interest, which has been recalled many times in these last 2 days. So narrative ecosystem analysis and development framework, systemic approach to contemporary serial product, the medical drama case. And to begin with, I'm sure that most of you are now familiar with The Good Doctor, but just to contextualize my research, The Good Doctor is a US medical drama airing on ABC since 2017, and it has now reached 6 broadcast and produced seasons, and then it has already been renewed for a 7th season. And the peculiarity of this medical drama is the fact that it is centered upon Sean Murphy, played by Freddie Highmore, that you can see here in this figure, who is a surgeon with autism spectrum disorder, ASD, and Savant syndrome. And as my interest in this medical drama grew up, I started to undertake some research to understand from which research perspective it has been investigated so far. And what I found out is that it has been mainly investigated from 2 research perspectives. The first one is linguistic. So, for example, focusing on the medical terminology contained in the script, or, for example, on the representation of the language disorder of the protagonist. While the second research perspective, so the medical humanities one, has focused, for example, on the representation of ASD, for example, by Cambrabadi and Bagnos, or, for example, also on the representation of the other condition that the protagonist has, so the Savant syndrome. To the best of my knowledge, only one study has investigated its reception, conducted by Stern and Barnes, and specifically focusing on the representation of the reception of the representation of ASD, using questionnaires and coming to positive results. So acknowledging this lack in research, in the reception of The Good Doctor, moved me to outline the 2 main aims of my research. So the first one is to analyze social discourses around The Good Doctor with a close attention to the representation of ASD within it. And the second one, simultaneously and methodologically speaking, to apply a quantitative data analysis tools to the field of reception studies, and more specifically, natural language processing techniques. Considering the first aim of my research, it can be broken down into 2 research questions. So the first one is, which are the main topics around The Good Doctor discussed by the audience, and how do they evolve over time? While the second one is, what is the sentiment of the audience towards representation of ASD within The Good Doctor? So given that my interest was to analyze social discourses, I've based my research on a social network, and in particular on Twitter, based on the fact that it is a social network that is primarily based on text compared to other social networks. And tweets were accessed through Twitter API. And the query was based on the official hashtag of the TV series, so hashtag The Good Doctor, considering as a time span the airing time of seasons 1 to 5. And you can see here in table 1 the resulting number of tweets. So in the original TGD dataset, which amounts to 385,000 tweets, more or less. Given that I was interested mainly in conducting my research in English, I filtered this original dataset for only those tweets that contained tweets written in English. And this basically, you can see the result here in always in table 2, in table 1. So in the English TGD dataset, which was composed of 276,000 tweets. In order to address the first research question, so to understand the topics of the social, on which social discourses focus, I use a topic modeling approach, which is the NLP task that automatically analyzes large collections of textual information by detecting the latent topics contained in them. And as a topic modeling algorithm, I chose topic, which is a relatively new algorithm developed in 2022 by Grutendorst, based on BERT, which has already been mentioned by the previous contribution. And BERT is a transformer, just like a GPT, and I'm sure that most of you have become familiar with GPT in these last few months due to ChatGPT. BERT topic was fit as far as the hyperparameters were concerned, even though I will not have the time to discuss in details the methodology that I've used, but I will be more than welcome to discuss it in the discussion section later. And in this model was run on the long English TGD dataset that you can see, and you can see its size always in table 1, which was compiled by filtering all the English TGD dataset for those tweets that contained at least 30 characters to avoid the noise and very short tweets. In order to address the second research question, so to understand the reception of the representation of ASD, I conducted a sentiment analysis, which is the NLP task that automatically classifies the text by extracting subjective information, the sentiment indeed, and tagging it as either positive, negative, or neutral. And as a sentiment analysis model, I chose Roberta, based itself on BERT, and in particular, the Twitter Roberta base for sentiment analysis, which is a sentiment analysis model that has been pre-trained on more than 124 million tweets. This model was run on the ASD dataset, which is basically compiled by filtering all the English TGD dataset for those tweets that contained at least one hashtag related to ASD. And you can see the resulting size always in table 1. Moving to the results, I hope that this slide doesn't look too confusing and too colorful. So here you can see all the topics on which social discourses on the Good Doctor focused. You can see here in table 2 in particular, their topic ID, the number of tweets belonging to each topic, the most describing words, and the most describing tweet for every topic. So you can see that we have 21 topics because we should count also the topic ID 0, so 21 topics. And in order to analyze them, I classified them into 4 categories, and you can see the result in table 3. And the categories are narrative, fruition, fandom, and noise. You can see always in table 3, the topic IDs belonging to each category, and the number of tweets for every category with the respective percentage based on out of the total number of tweets. So as you can see, the most frequent category of topic is the narrative one, even though it is made up of only one topic, so topic ID 0, amounting to the 43.4% out of the total number of tweets. And in this case, as you can see, more specifically from the most describing words and the most representative tweet, this topic is not only based on narration, but more specifically on the storylines between the main characters. And here, Sean, Leah, Claire are mentioned. Moving to the second most frequent category, so the fruition one, we can see that 10 topics were classified as such and were colored in gray in table 2. Amounted to the 43.3% out of the total number of tweets. So basically, this percentage almost evens out the percentage of the narrative category of topics. And in this case, I was able to identify 3 main trends as far as the fruition category of topic is concerned. So first of all, all those topics that focused specifically on the general fruition of the TV series. So for example, if we look at topic ID 2 and then the most representative tweet, we can see that this topic focuses on the fact that, just to share that Twitter users were watching the TV series. Another trend that I could identify among this category of topics, the recent category of topics, was the fact that some topics gave us some hints to understand that Twitter users were watching the TV series synchronously. So for example, if we look at topic ID 7, we can understand that the hashtag The Good Doctor trended, so was trending topic, and very likely during the broadcast of the TV series. The third trend that I could identify among the free category was related to those topics that basically represented the clues to understand that Twitter users also like to watch this TV series asynchronously. And for example, if we look at topic ID 18 and at the most representative tweet, we can see that, for example, there is the sharing of an online streaming platforms through which we can watch this TV series, this medical drama. Turning to the third most frequent category of topics, so the fandom-related one, this category amounts to the 8.5% out of the total number of tweets. And here as well, I could identify two main tendencies. So one is based on basically the acclaim of Freddie Highmore acting performance. So if we look, for example, at topic ID 5, so basically this topic revolves around the praising of his acting performance, but actually there are also topics that focus not only praise his performance, but also vote for him or promote him in some words. So for example, topic ID 9 expresses the fact that Twitter users voted for him at the People's Choice Awards, or topic 11 at the Emmys, so proposed him a nomination at the Emmys. The second trend that I could identify among the fandom category is the fact that Twitter users also like to share petitions that fans submitted. And for example, topic ID 6 was based on the sharing of the petition to save Dr. Melendez. Or two other topics, topic ID 8 and 16, were based on two petitions to ask ABC to renew the show for another season. The last category of topics, the noise one, amounting to less than 5% of the tweets, were basically revolved around all those topics that exploited, to some extent, the popularity of the hashtag The Good Doctor to basically discuss something else other than the TV series. Moving to the time trends of the topics, I was able to identify two main time trends that the topics had. So here in figure 2A, I reported all those topics that had a discontinuous time trend, while in figure 2B, I reported all those topics that had a peaking time trend. So they peaked somewhere during the time span considered. And if we look at figure 2A, we can understand, for example, that this discontinuous time trend, actually, I analyzed this discontinuous time trend by putting it in comparison with the airing time of the show. And as you can see, basically all the topics are more or less aligned. So the peaks and drops of these topics are more or less aligned. And if we look at the airing time of the show, I was actually able to see that the peaks of these topics always took place when the TV series was airing, while the drops took place when the TV series was not airing. So either during the summer break or during the Christmas hiatuses of the TV series. Focusing on figure 2B, so on those topics that peaked, we can see that the majority of them peaked either at the very beginning of the time span considered, so in 2017, or right at the beginning of 2018, so still during the first season. There's just one exception, so the topic in purple that you can see that peaked in 2020, which is the topic ID 6, which revolved around the petition to save Dr. Melendez's character. And I'm sorry to do spoilers here, but he died in the third season, which aired in 2020. So it was not a coincidence, of course. Coming to the results of the second research question, so the sentiment analysis to understand the reception of the representation of ASD, you can see through this pie chart that the majority of tweets were classified as positive. So almost 60% of the ASD dataset was classified as positive. The 29.3% was classified as neutral, while only 11.2% of the tweets were classified as negative. And just to give you a clue on how this sentiment analysis worked, I basically reported here the tweet with the highest score for every sentiment, with the highest score for every sentiment tag, which is basically the tweet towards which the sentiment analysis model is more confident in attributing the sentiment tag. So as you can see here, the positive tweet says, and I read, just watch The Good Doctor, and okay, thank you. My son with autism also enjoyed it, can't wait to see what's next. So it's definitely a positive tweet. The negative tweet instead, and I apologize in advance for the swear words, hashtag cancel The Good Doctor, hashtag The Good Doctor, hashtag actual autistic. I have been waiting for fucking years for these assholes to apologize for working with Autism Speaks and putting on a stereotypical voice. You are hurting us. Just a few words on Autism Speaks, which is an association that thinks that ASD is a disease that can be cured. So we can understand why people with ASD are harshly criticize this association. And the neutral tweet reported here, hashtag The Good Doctor, season 1, episode 7, 22 steps, promotional photos, behind the scene and synopsis, a link, and then hashtag Freddie Highmore, hashtag Sean Murphy, hashtag autism, hashtag Good Doctor. So first of all, we can all agree that the first tweet is positive, the second tweet is negative, and the third tweet is neutral. However, we can see that if for the first two tweets, the sentiment of the tweet is directed towards representation of ASD, this is not the same for the last tweet, so the neutral tweet. And it is actually a limitation that the general sentiment analysis approach has. So the fact that it is able to basically grab the sentiment of a tweet, but we can never really be sure towards which aspect, category, element of a tweet the sentiment is directed. And I'm currently working to overcome this limitation by adopting an aspect-based sentiment analysis on the dataset. Moving to the conclusions, Twitter social discourses around The Good Doctor mostly discuss the narrative storylines, and in particular the storylines between the main characters, validating previous research that has focused on the reception of audiovisual serial product. Social discourses also focused on fruition. So Twitter users share that they have watching The Good Doctor, and they both enjoy watching it live and live tweeting to feel connected to a large online viewing audience, and on streaming platforms to follow their own patterns of viewing. There was also space to acknowledge that a high engagement of its fandom, committed to again the accolades of the narrative and the accolades or the narrative and productive decision through petitions. The time trends of the social discourses followed the broadcast of the medical drama and were higher, in particular at the very beginning of the time span considered. The representation of ASD within the TV series was mainly received positively, even though not unanimously, corroborating certain Barnes research, which has dealt on the reception of representation of ASD. And methodologically speaking, this first exploratory analysis has proved that NLP tools can be efficiently integrated into the field of reception studies of audiovisual serial products. And I can anticipate that as part of the NEAD framework project that I'm currently working to adopt this methodology also on other contemporary US medical drama, along with my research team, Professors Pescatore and Rocchi. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Greta. That was another really, really fascinating paper. This panel's turning out really great. Let me hand over to the fourth speaker of this morning's panel, which is Giorgio Avezzu. Giorgio Avezzu is assistant professor at the University of Bergamo. He's the author of 2 books and 2 journal issues dedicated to the question of the relationships between audiovisual content and geography, and most recently, L'Italia che guarda, which came out this year, which I have a copy of here, so I can Shout out to all of you, as in promote it. Among his most recent publications, this has also included an article for GeoJournal, mapping the market for foreign cinema in Italy during the last 20 years. So within the lines of this approach to the relationship between geography and audiovisual consumption, Giorgio's paper this morning will be entitled Italian Medical TV Series and the Geography of Their Consumption. Over to you, Giorgio.
Thank you, Dom, for the introduction and promotion, and thanks to the organizers, Stefania and Marta, for having me. Okay. Over the past few years, I've focused on exploring the geographic heterogeneity in audiovisual consumption in Italy, especially over the last 2 decades. Among other things, I wanted to investigate whether national success of scripted content, such as films shown in theaters and on television, as well as domestically produced TV series, is accompanied by homogeneity of consumption across the different regions of the country. Through an extensive analysis of several thousand films, I've found that the regional popularity of domestic cinema varies greatly, even in the case of the most successful titles. I have observed similar trends also in the consumption of original TV series on free-to-air broadcasters, namely Rai and Mediaset. These operators are the ones for which it makes more sense to inquire about audience data, given the size of their success, which is a lot different and is of different order of magnitude than that of original pay TV series like those on Sky TV, for example. However, despite the great success on domestic television seriality in Italy, it is not necessarily the case that every title, even the most watched ones, are equally successful throughout the country, from Lombardy to Sicily. It is true that the degree of regional fragmentation of television consumption is lower than that of theatrical cinema consumption. This is primarily due to the fact that television is a more popular medium than cinema, with a larger viewership, and so its success tends to be better diluted across the territory. However, there are still significant differences in the popularity of single titles across the north, center, and south of Italy, as well as in different regions. These differences are also influenced by the presence of certain factors in each series capable of attracting local consumption. These are the very same factors that attract local consumption of films at the cinema and of the same films when they are broadcast on television. They are primarily textual factors: the setting, location, and the presence of certain actors. One of the things I'm most interested in is precisely trying to link the variances in consumption to context factors that can attract or repel audiences. Depending on where they reside, people prefer to watch something and not something else. Before we move on, it is important to address the issue of metrics. When discussing theatrical cinema, the metrics are straightforward: box office and attendance, which measures the number of people who pay for a ticket to watch a film from start to finish. However, when analyzing television consumption, the metrics are more complex and involve a lot of viewer traffic in and out of each TV program. The standard metric of average minute rating, ascolto medio, might give the impression that we are dealing with data similar to that of movies. And so Macari had 6.3 million viewers. However, this metric combines 2 different aspects of TV consumption: a quantitative aspect, that is the number of unique viewers who watch the program for at least a minute, the so-called reach, and a qualitative aspect, that is the time that each viewer on average spent watching the program, the so-called loyalty index. One thing we know is that, for example, textual factors such as setting has both a power of attraction for local audiences on the reach of a certain region, and the power of engagement for the same audiences on the loyalty index in the same region. A series set in Sicily attracts more Sicilian viewers and keeps them sitting before the TV screen longer than normal. so to speak. When we look at the share figure, which is a metric that calibrates the average audience over the so-called TV total, that is over the breadth of the whole TV audience in the same time interval, we are actually looking together, and thus we are confusing both of these dimensions, that is both the quantitative and qualitative aspects of consumption. The share figures serve, as is well known, to normalize consumption with respect to the fluctuation of the television audience, depending on the season of the year, the day of the week. Now, in my research, I've identified all first-run domestically produced TV series broadcast in prime time on Rai and Mediaset between 2016 and the first half of 2022, which amounted to a total of 181 titles, seasons. It's better not to go much further back in time because the share figure of the free-to-air channel, which is quite stable in this period, was much higher in previous year before the arrival of digital transmission. So I've considered a time period with a fairly stable audience from a numerical point of view, both share and total audience, and therefore average minute rating. For each title, I considered the share figure, total and regional, and computed the regional popularity simply by dividing the share of each region by the total share. Therefore, titles can be compared regardless of their level of success. For this title, Sicily has 1.57 times the national share, that is plus 57%. And this is, we said, a figure that depends on and condenses a high reach and a high loyalty index. In general, the further south you go in Italy, the more television and TV series are watched. So in order to account for regional differences in television consumption habits, I normalized the data using a Z-score. And using this popularity value, I created a graph that illustrates the overall heterogeneity of consumption of all the series I considered. To visualize the consumption patterns of the 181 TV series, I used a dimensionality reduction technique called principal component analysis, PCA. I reduced the 9 dimensions that correspond to the popularity of each title in the 9 major regions to 3 dimensions that summarize them to some degree. Specifically, PCA 0 accounts for 59% of the variance, PCA 1 for 12%, and PCA 2, 7%. Each dot on the resulting scatter plot represents a TV series, and the closer 2 dots are to each other, the more similar these 2 TV series are in terms of their geographic distribution of audiences across the country. And the further TV series is from the core of the cloud of dots, the more its consumption has been dislocated somewhere in Italy. Most of the variance in consumption patterns is captured by the horizontal axis, as I mentioned earlier. By looking at the correlation circle, it becomes clear that this dimension describes the imbalance of views between the north and south of Italy. In fact, the difference between the north and south in terms of affinity and a divergence in tastes for Italian fiction on the whole appears to be very strong and is more pronounced than the difference between difference seen in theatrical film viewing tastes. It can be clearly seen also from this correlation matrix. However, one of the challenges when analyzing the heterogeneity of consumption of Italian television is the impact of regional affinity for particular broadcasters. If we color the dots in the scatter plot differently based on the broadcasting channel, we can see that Rai Uno and Canale 5 tend to arrange themselves in almost distinct clusters, so to speak. This is true for Rai 2 and Rai 3 also, except for a few titles that are clearly associated with the South, such as Mare Fuori and Il Cacciatore in the case of Rai 2. Yes, 3D animation, but yeah, believe me, it's true. The imbalance in the popularity of each title must therefore be calibrated to the imbalance in viewership that traditionally characterized the channel that broadcast it. Or else we risk attributing variation in popularity to content features while they are actually due to the broadcasting channel. When we account for this factor, thank you. Moving. When we account for this factor, we can see that the textual factors that attract consumption are consistently the ones we mentioned earlier, such as the setting or location and the cast, net of the local inertia of viewing for each channel. Fine. Where do medical drama series fit into this picture? I counted 12 among the 181 series in my sample. We can leave aside one, La Linea Verticale, because it was broadcast on Rai 3 and therefore had an audience not comparable to the others. So we are left with 11 titles broadcast by Rai 1 and Canale 5. It seems to me that these titles show a geographic heterogeneity in popularity that is quite low. In order to take into account the geographic dissimilarity of the average audience of each channel, that is the different regional habits with respect to the viewings of the different networks, I normalized the popularity value of each title, which I derived in the way I described earlier, to the median value of each region for each channel. This way we can appreciate the popularity imbalances produced by the content, canceling out the noise produced by the channel. I calculated the coefficient of variation of this data only with reference to the 9 major regions, and indeed the 11 medical series for the most part show a very low degree of variation, as well as a maximum popularity deviation in the region where each title is most popular, that is also relatively low. 8 series out of 11 rank below, even far below the median values according to these indicators. 2 series alone stand out visibly above normal values, Cuori and Fino all'ultimo battito. In the first case, the deviation is not that great, and above all, it does not seem to be related to the setting. Cuori is set in Turin and reconstructs the Molinete Hospital in the late 1960s, while the popularity deviation occurs in Campania. Piedmont, on the other hand, is perfectly in line with the expected popularity in that region. The only real major popularity imbalance for a medical series is the one that occurs for Fino all'ultimo battito. This imbalance, by contrast, occurs precisely in Puglia, the region where the series is set. In all other cases, series in the medical genre seem to have a popularity that is always rather evenly distributed in the various regions of Italy, aside from the differences in popularity for Rai 1 and Canale 5 between northern and southern Italy. Local popularity doesn't usually hit a big high point in this graph, as you can see. There are not so many other genres comparable to the medical one by number of titles. Detective titles, for example, are many more, and as one can imagine, they are distributed very variously over the territory, both in terms of setting and consumption. The period historical genre is perhaps a better term of comparison, as it has a similar number of series, but shows a considerably more heterogeneous pattern of consumption than the medical genre. The exceptional homogeneity in the geography of consumption of original medical series of Italian broadcasters can be attributed in part to the neutral, aseptic, and uncharacterized settings that are often portrayed in the genre. The interiors of hospitals are typically depicted in a modern and anonymous style, while exterior shots, even when showing specific hospitals, are not usually universally known landmarks. And this results in medical series attracting a nationwide audience without alienating viewers who may perceive the story as culturally distant. medical series managed to level out consumption, making it similar across the country. This is partly due to the fact that the genre focuses on a large number of indoor scenes and doesn't give great visibility to specific settings, landscapes, or locations, which instead typical of many other series of other genres, particularly in recent years, since, for example, Rai has decided to pursue an editorial strategy that aimed precisely at mapping the entire Italian territory with its own original production. But on the other hand, this homogeneity is perhaps also a sign of the power of a genre, which operates a process of anonymization or delocalization, allocalization of its stories. And it succeeds in doing this quite well. Even when admittedly, there is no absence of local references. It is true that there are some titles such as Oltre la Soglia of Canale 5 set in Rome, which almost never represent the capital city in any recognizable way, at least in the first episodes. But other series cannot be said to hide the places where they are set. For example, Doc, Nelle tue mani, definitely cannot be said to conceal that it is largely filmed in Milan. Yet Doc manages to be one of the most homogeneously viewed titles of all 181 in my sample. In short, I think that the great geographical homogeneity of the consumption of domestic medical seriality is a symptom of the genre's vitality and of its ability to counter, thanks to its typical storylines, characters, and iconography, the demonstrative attractional force that characterizes the use of setting and location of most Italian TV fiction production, to which a geographical imbalance in consumption usually follows. The only real exception, to conclude, fino all'ultimo battito, can be explained by the fact that Puglia, where the series set, is not a region like any other. Among the 9 major regions, Puglia is on average the most voracious for original domestic primetime seriality, both in general and specifically for Rai Uno series. And it is not a region that has a great television visibility in recent times. On the contrary, it is underrepresented. There aren't many titles set there. Puglia is possibly more visible in the establishing shots of Fino all'ultimo battito than other setting locations in other medical series, but it is probably the combination of the fascination for TV fiction in that region and its relative underrepresentation that has made the series popular in Puglia. And this has made Fino all'ultimo battito more a series about Puglia than a series in the medical genre for the audience. Just like most of the series produced in Italy around this time, they are not so much series of this or that genre, but rather series that represent or thematize a specific region. And this is why they are usually so heterogeneously watched geographically. But apart from this case, it seems to me that in general, the medical genre succeeds in the operation of unifying the country's audiences, which is very rare in the Italian audiovisual landscape, and perhaps indicative of a vitality, as I said, and of the exceptional nature of this genre itself. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Giorgio, and actually, indeed, thank you to all of the speakers, 5 speakers who are with us, or 7 authors, I guess, in total. I think that this was a really fascinating panel, and all 4 papers illustrate just how using these kind of more innovative methodologies can really teach us so much more about the texts than the texts themselves, and all 4 in, I think, interestingly different ways, but ways that lend itself immediately to thinking about comparisons and thinking about how your different methodologies could work together, perhaps. We have, I would say, about 20 minutes, I think, if not more, for questions. So I would immediately open the floor. You might have to help me out a little bit. I can't see if anybody's asking questions, unfortunately, from here, but I'm sure you can. So if anybody, yeah, I can see already Paolo Braga has a question online. Paolo?
Buongiorno, can you hear me?
Yeah,
Can you hear me?
Can you in the room as well?
Yes, yes, yes.
Great. Go ahead, Paolo.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay. Good
Yes.
morning. Good morning. Thank you to all the panelists for their wonderful presentation. My question is especially for Paola and Paolo della Torre e Paolo Fantozzi, and for Alice Fetodova and Alberto Barron. It's about dialogue, which is a challenging topic. That's why I really appreciated the presentation. I wonder if in their researches they have dealt with the contribution on dialogue of screenwriting theories. I mean, especially in medical drama, film dialogue creates problems to the writers. For example, the problem of exposition, how to make the character explain medical techniques, for example, and making them understandable for the audience. So this is my question. Thank you.
Thank you for the question. But for our analysis, we don't care about the meaning of the phrase of the dialogue. We only analyze the structure of the dialogue. So the character and the relation.
Yeah, not the contents.
Not the contents.
At least for the time being.
Yeah. Thank you.
As for my presentation, I think it's a very interesting avenue for future research. And in my case, I mean, we looked at the whole dialogues without doing any sort of feature engineering to specifically look at some particular aspect. We just use the raw dialogues as they are. But I think it's a very interesting feature aspect that could be considered to maybe improve the performance of the model on some classes indeed.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you for your questions and your answers. I think there's a question, another question over there with you.
Sorry.
So I'm Andrea Bernardelli, and I have a question for Paola Dalla Torre and Maurizio Naldi, obviously. So, I enjoyed your paper, not only because you have cited me, and so it's not my academic ego that I'm thanking you. So, I'm joking. So I don't know if I'm pushing too far what you have said, but you have identified a sort of imaging, and I use this technical term from cognitive sciences, of the structure of dialogues in a sort of way. My question is it possible that these dialogical patterns visualized in that way? So, even isomorphism with the way in which the characters are set on the scene also, so, and with the way they are shot. So, I mean, is it possible that the authors, the screenwriters, through dialogues through the structure of the dialogues, are also thinking to the structure of the set, so where the characters are physically positioned? I don't know if I pushed too far what I've said, so. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the question. No, we didn't do that, but you're not pushing too far. Actually, you are moving the analysis to a higher level. And it is very interesting. I mean, I take it as a suggestion for our to go forward. And of course, that would mean passing from the textual level only to the visual level too. Okay, so we would have to examine the video part of the movies. So considering all the frames, the shots, and so on. And it is quite beyond what we had done so far. Okay, it would mean applying image processing analysis, so it is a very interesting direction to take. So we should consider whether it is in line with all the amount of stuff we have to do. Yet, okay. Thank you very much. Anyway,
Thank you.
Okay, thank you for your contribution. Since we start with Paola and Maurizio, I have just a curiosity about how do you detect the scenes and the related graph of characters for your study? If it is manually or
okay.
Thank you.
Sheer old manual labeling. Okay, so we had a number of people watching all the episodes and marking where the scene starts and where it ends. Okay, that's it. Okay, and of course we also matched it with the scripts. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. I had a question for Giorgio. I was wondering, it's just out of curiosity, because I don't know anything about that field. Do you know if some similar research has been done about the US medical series, and if there is also that same common thing about maybe series being identified in specific cities, and is there a viewership that is more prevalent in these cities, maybe?
Thank you for the question. No, actually, I don't know. I know that I don't have data about imported series in Italy. Unfortunately, it would be interesting to compare the way they are consumed around the country, but unfortunately, I don't have data. And this would be another variable to take into account and to normalize. So maybe it's better not to have that data as well. But yeah.
We have another question.
Thank you. Just a quick and probably very ignorant question, because these are not my methodologies, let's say. So if this is a silly question, I apologize in advance for Paola and Maurizio. You said that you, for the purposes of your methodology, you didn't consider which characters were doing the talking, right? But then in your conclusions, it seems that it was quite important for you to go back to understanding the character of House as the hub, right? You called it. So at what point, I suppose, at what point does that come back into the analysis in order for that conclusion to be made? And did you do it so that you could be surprised by the results, I suppose? Because obviously, I don't think anyone is particularly shocked to find that House is the kind of structuring principle of dialogue in the series. But so I assume, I was kind of hypothesizing that this anonymity, initial anonymization, let's say, of the dialogue, of the characters, was done in order to allow the material to surprise you, I guess. And then just a question for Greta. Did you have any way of analyzing the positive and negative reactions to the series in relation to ASD, in relation to whether people were speaking from within the ASD community or as people who don't who are not on the spectrum, and is that relevant to your analysis? Thank you.
Okay, thank you for the question. Okay, we didn't use the exact character identification in the isomorphisms problem, but of course we know who was talking to whom. So we classified the graphs, scene graphs, without taking into account which character is talking to each other. Okay, but of course we know that in the majority of cases, it was Dr. House acting as a hub in the Strad network, okay? And our aim was to, I mean, it wasn't shocking to see that House is really the main character, dubbing character, but it was interesting to see in which kind of interactions is involved with the other characters, okay? Is he acting mostly as a, say, in a monologue, a way of interaction? Is he acting in a stichometia way, and so on, okay? So that was interesting to us. Of course, we knew in advance that probably, unless the screenwriters didn't get it wrong, House was the main character, and so probably was the hub in most things, okay?
Okay, thank you, Rosa, for your question, first of all, and thank you for giving me the chance to speak about this. And so the question was whether there was a difference between the reception of ASD between people with ASD and people who don't have ASD. Well, as far as the tweets that I have looked at so far, well, the question is actually no, in the sense that, as you maybe get a sense of it from the 3 tweets that I have reported here, this reception is actually either is not unanimous, even among the people with ASD. So indeed, if you looked at the positive tweet that I have reported, there was a person with ASD saying, okay, this I really love how the representation of ASD was depicted in The Good Doctor, and I enjoyed it. My son has autism, and he empathized, he related with Sean Murphy. While the negative tweet said basically the opposite. So what I found out is that basically there was not an unanimous reception, not even among people with ASD. But what I want to do as a future step of my research is to expand the data on which I've conducted my research. So for example, analyzing ASD specialized blogs in order to see whether on other platforms, on other social platforms, something different emerges. So thank you for your question, and thank you for giving me the chance to speak also about the future perspectives of my research.
If I can take advantage of my position as chair, I had a couple of questions that I would be interested in asking. I don't want to take up too much time though, if there are others in the room. So let me just ask them, and then, if you have time to answer. The first was for Alice, and I was wondering whether the answer might just simply be no, and if that's the case, then fair enough. But I was wondering whether in your research you've thought about looking at any other kinds of elements to teach the machine learning to look at. One thing that came to my mind in particular was whether something like sound, or more broadly music, could be used, because on the one hand, I feel like that's going to be quite relevant in TV generally, especially kind of more melodramatic drama series. But on the other hand, I could see how that melodrama might lend itself both to all 3 isotopies, or at least to 2 of the 3 isotopies. So I was wondering broadly whether you've considered any other kinds of elements. And if I may just keep talking quickly, Greta, I also wanted to ask you a question briefly, which was, I was struck looking at your results that at a certain point in some of the main topics that came out, there were some connections to other kinds of TV shows. I saw there was a series of TV shows that were trending, right? Like not just The Good Doctor. And I was wondering, again, the answer might just be no, so I'm sorry if so, but whether this can give us any indication of the consumption of this show and how it relates to the consumption of other kinds of shows. Thank you.
Thank you for the question. I want to take advantage of this just to show myself a little bit, because I think that the connection has become a bit more stable now. And as for the music, I'm actually very surprised, because when I did the pre-processing of the subtitles, I actually removed the square brackets with the song names, because I felt that they could add some noise. I mean, but so I also have a question for you. Do you think that the music, the indication of the music that is playing, correlate, I could indicate an isotopy based on what we've been discussing?
I mean, my instinct would be that it might, yeah, but I guess I'm thinking of one case in particular, which I don't know if it really counts as a medical drama because it's a comedy, which is Scrubs, but Scrubs like famously uses certain kinds of songs in some of the more kind of like melodramatic or particularly the kind of personal stories, like if characters die or if, I don't know, like that famous episode where Dr. Cox is kind of imagining, I think it's his brother, sorry if it's a spoiler, who I think has passed away in the episode. And the music's really powerfully used to express that kind of affective element. But I can see also why you would take it out for the noise reason.
I think that it might be a very good idea to repeat the training of the model by including this information as well, because I really did not consider this to be indicative, but actually now that I think of it, it could have been definitely helpful for the model. And I had another idea of things that might indicate a certain isotopy. So a feature that I wanted to explore was how many times a character is mentioned in the whole data set. So maybe a character that appears less might be more typical of medical cases, because these are this is the isotopy where you have these characters that maybe only appear once or twice, and then they disappear forever. So that's another feature, we call them features sort of in machine learning, that I wanted to explore maybe for the model. So yeah, I thank you a lot for the advice, for adding the information about the soundtrack, because I think it might be useful.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Dan, for your question. So the question was on whether the topics I discussed, also the other TV shows, can give us some understanding also on other TV shows, right? Okay, well, it depends on the topic, in the sense that, for example, there were some topics that basically shared the schedule, so the listings of the TV shows, and so there was hashtag The Good Doctor, and also the other hashtags basically of the TV series. Or, for example, hashtags based on the ratings, the shared ratings of the previous evening on TV. So basically, those specific topics do not really tell us more than the fact that that specific TV show aired the day before, or the ratings on that TV series or show the day before. But actually, there were also topics that, for example, discussed other Freddie Highmore's TV series. They put, for example, in comparison, The Good Doctor with a TV series or with other medical drama. So this was also something that was very, very useful to know and to understand, and to basically acknowledge that social discourses on a single medical drama actually recalled also other medical drama and put them into comparison. So the answer is yes and no. It depends on the topic.
Thank you. And if I could just really quickly, again, I don't want to take up time, but I had a question for Giorgio as well, if I may, which is, it's really interesting to see of course, I know your research a little bit, but it was really interesting to see this, the specificity of the medical dramas. And especially find very, very, very convincing what you said about the neutral settings, even in the case of Doc, where Milan is quite present in the series, the neutrality of the hospital kind of seems to just make that much more broadly accessible. It's a kind of broader question about the research, which maybe doesn't have that much to do with the medical drama, but I was wondering whether you've had any chance to account for stardom in this sense, because obviously in the Italian star system, regionalism is just as relevant as it is broadly in the audiovisual system. So I was wondering if there were, I don't know, particularly Sicilian, I'm thinking about your research on film, where obviously particularly comic actors are more popular, as you argue, in certain kinds of regions. I was wondering if that applies to television as well, and if stardom is a factor in the regional consumption of the shows you've studied.
Yeah, and thank you, Dom. Yes, this is a factor that affects consumption, of course, but this isn't a factor that you can see working on how the consumption of medical TV series are consumed across the country, which is, yeah, quite something I expected by looking at the thing that you said, the way that settings are portrayed, and the fact that they are neutral or neutralized in a sense, because even when they are present, they do not work with that attractional force, I said, is typical of all the other Italian TV series. And this is what I found most interesting, because I've never been very much interested in that specific genre, precisely because, not as a spectator but as a researcher, precisely because I didn't see any spike, any peak in popularity in regional popularity among those titles. I was more interested in spotting the anomalies in consumption. And then I found that it's the anomaly of the medical genre is precisely the absence of anomalies, which is very peculiar in a sense. I don't know if I answered your question.
Yeah, thank you. I'm not sure if there are maybe any other questions there in the room.
No, I think that we are looking for the lunch break. Thank you, Dom.
Before lunch, that's always good to wait. Well, thank you again to all of you, and thank you for the really, really fascinating papers. And buon appetito.